Hello friends, as many of you know, I'm going to summit Mount Everest in May, and a part of the reason I'm doing this alongside the obvious adventure is to shine a light for our struggling veterans out there, just like I struggled when I left the Royal Marines, became homeless and chronically mentally unwell, wandering the streets of Hong Kong. But the other thing, as you know, is I'm going to use my expanding platform to highlight the link between childhood trauma and complex PTSD. If you can support me, there's a link below, folks, but that's not what I'm mentioning this for. I'm introducing my next guest, and I'm actually going to read off the screen for this one because Ash has got such a wide-ranging experience and it across so many areas. A former Gurkha officer, soldier, combat helicopter pilot, wounded veteran, and an international defence lead for Palantir. Ash has spent 7 years deployed in complex and often hostile environments, both in Europe, the Middle East and Central Asia. Among his international honours and awards, Ash has been awarded the MBE, the OBE. He's a recipient of the Government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's Medal of Honor, the United States Bronze Star, and a Commendation for Valor. And Ash is also an award-winning musician and has represented England and Great Britain in 3 different sports up to World Championship level. Wow. Let's go and meet
Random.
Ash.
It's a bit random, isn't it?
Yes, Ash, I think you got a CV a bit like mine. It's kind of it's,
It's. I think the kind way of saying it's eclectic, or you could just say random.
yes, but I think eclectic is good. Do you think having a wide-ranging life view, a holistic view of life, is sort of important for understanding who we are and what our traumas have been, and obviously the healing process?
I mean, for me, just generally in life, I just feel like there's an urgency to just try things and do things and experience things, both good and bad. And so I've always been that kind of person that would always say yes to do something or volunteer for something, whatever it might be. And if it didn't work out or it was unpleasant, then I might have learned something in the process anyway. But you referenced childhood trauma. I mean, I don't consider myself to have complex PTSD in any way, but when I was writing my book, I certainly was forced to kind of look back at my early years. And I think the one of the reasons why I can't sit still and have to try all these things and do stuff is linked actually to some of those experiences as a child where there was a risk always or an inherent threat that anything and everything we had, whether it was friends or toys or even the schools we went to, would be taken away at a moment's notice if somebody else chose to. And so I think there's that sort of constant drive to just do more things and experience things just in case, subliminally that those things are no longer options or are taken away. So I think there's definitely a link to those early experiences as to why I have such a random CV that you read out.
Absolutely. I was just, if I'm looking across friends, I'm not ignoring my guest. I'm just putting stuff up on the other screen there. We're going to come on and talk about your book, Mindful Soldier, and we'll come back to our childhood experiences. Ash, I couldn't sort of gather, looking at your LinkedIn and your information, when you say elite forces, could you just expand? Could you or give us what was your military career? It's fascinating that you work with the Gurkhas, but you're also a pilot.
Yeah, so well, I mean, again, it's a bit random. I joined the army expecting to do 3, maybe 5 years. I didn't think of it ever as a career, genuinely. And when I was going through training and looking at the different regiments that were available to join, I honestly had no idea quite how many there were, and I was overwhelmed by the number of different types of regiments in different locations, etc. And I thought if I was going to do just a 3 or maybe 5 year career, I wanted to look for a regiment that might offer the most interesting experiences in that time, if that was the window that I had. And at the time, the Gurkhas were in 5 airborne brigades. They were airborne soldiers doing parachuting, which had always appealed to me. I'd had sort of parachute regiment cadet leaders back in the day when I was a bit younger, who'd always encouraged me that parachuting was a great thing to be doing. And they were in Hong Kong. They were doing obviously a lot of the soldiers were all from Nepal, so I would have to learn a language, learn a culture. They were doing other things in the UK, and officers were able to go and do counterterrorism work in Northern Ireland. So I thought if I'm going to do that short period of time in the army, then this would be a really fascinating place to be. And I was fortunate to be selected, and that's the regiment that I joined, and that's where it all started. Became a jungle warfare instructor, and all sorts of other fun things like that. Deployed to Bosnia, Northern Ireland, and other places. And then opportunities just kept presenting themselves. So I had friends who were off to do the pilot's course. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. Never planned on being a pilot either, but why not? Let's give it a go. And off I went, and then flew for a while. Lynx helicopters, which have now been retired, which it makes me feel very old when you see the helicopter you flew sitting outside a camp, camp gate as a museum piece. But it was a great helicopter to fly, great fun. Huge amount of experience doing that, which was very valuable. And then the rest of my career that I sort of carried on looking for different opportunities. I did time in the MOD, which was interesting, let's say. Lots of time in operational deployments with various joint users and units. Worked a lot with the Americans, worked a huge amount with NATO. So very, very fortunate to have had a very varied career. And as you mentioned in the intro, 7 years deployed in all the places. So yeah, I've got no regrets for having accidentally stayed 22 years regular and another 4 or 5 years, 6 years in the reserves. It's been a fascinating journey.
Yes, the Gurkhas are, or the infamous Gurkhas, I should say, always kind of well liked within the country, aren't they? I ended up doing 2 para courses for reasons I won't go into, but they certainly seem to be. I think they were the biggest, alongside the young paras. They were the most people on the course. Didn't always like jumping out of aeroplanes, though. Is that fair to say?
um, I wouldn't say that was necessarily fair. I mean, I know people criticize their lack of air awareness sometimes, that they'll happily jump out, but what they then do when they're under canopy is not necessarily always uh, the most by the book way to fly a parachute. There is a funny story I remember being told once about back in Malaya days, where they were looking for volunteers to trial a new type of jungle entry where they thought they could fly planes low over the jungle and people would jump out into the jungle with parachutes. And when they were looking for volunteers, they went to one of the Gurkha units and said, look, we're going to be doing this thing. Planes would fly fairly low over the jungle, and then you jump out, and then that's the way we think we could get you behind enemy lines to deploy. And they had a really low number of volunteers put their hands up, which they thought was very unusual because Gurkhas normally, stick their hands up for everything. And then they said, and here is the parachute. And the rest of them went, oh, parachute. And the rest of them put their hands up. So actually, those that volunteered initially thought they were just going to have to jump out of the plane into the trees. So they're, yeah, a good bunch.
What about is it a myth that when they draw their kukri, it has to draw blood?
I mean, that certainly, I think, used to be the tradition. I've not seen people do that actively when they've drawn to cut down a tree or get through the jungle. People aren't then cutting themselves before they put it away. So I think it's an ancient tradition, but the principle applies in the sense that if a Gurkha draws a kukri in anger, it's because they're going to do something with it. It's not something that they would do lightly.
Did you get issued one as a platoon commander?
Not issued, sort of issued, or you get presented one actually. So when I joined my first platoon, they said, right, now here's a cookie. I actually got it here. So I've got my jungle kukri with that with a blade painted black, says no shine when you're in the jungle, no sun can glint off it. And yeah, wrapped in camouflage stuff, and that would live on my belt kit for when I was deployed.
Wow. So, what recommendations would you give me for my Everest summit in April and May with respect to getting on well with the Nepalese?
Well, they're very easy to get on with. I mean, Nepali people are so kind and so generous. I talk about it in the book at the end in terms of a really great lesson when you spend time in a country like that that is inherently pretty poor. And even people who have virtually nothing, they are the most generous people you will ever come across. So they can never do enough for you. They're just lovely, kind people, but they're pretty hard. You know, they are gritty and determined, and they are very, very resilient as a nation. But in terms of climbing Everest, I love the idea of it, but I've got frost damaged fingers and toes, and I quite fancy having them still attached. So I don't think I'll ever be going up that far. But I know plenty of people who have climbed in many, many cases multiple times. So you should definitely speak. I'm sure you are, but speak to a lot of people who have summited successfully, because they'll be the ones to give you the tips, not the people who nearly got there but didn't quite make it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Are there any taboos that we need to avoid?
As in with Nepali people
Yeah,
culturally.
I lived in Hong Kong, for for a while, and it was kind of crazy. My experience was in two phases. First was completely oblivious as an expat to even the fact that this is a different culture. I don't know why you kind of get this thing growing up that you think, well, we're all the same, and in Hong Kong, I got to kind of like a midway point, and then just things unraveled, and I realized that I didn't even have a clue where I was living, and the differences. I'm not saying this is a negative, but the differences between our cultures was so enormous. Even little things like I used to buy the security guard on the door of my building. If I went out to the 7-Eleven to get drinks, I'd come and grab him a Coca-Cola or something. I didn't realize that's considered patronizing, and
No,
so I just wondered if there's anything I need to be.
not really. I mean, like a general rule in life is just don't be a dick. Treat people with kindness and respect, because they will do anything and everything for you. And like any language, when if you're not from that place, if you can learn a few words, even just please and thank you and good morning and that sort of stuff, it makes the world of difference, because it just shows that you've actually made an effort. I think in any country you go to, where if you turn up and you just speak loudly in English and expect people to understand or do what you want, it always, it's always more difficult. So yeah, just a bit of respect, and recognizing that for them, the Himalayas and Everest specifically is a religious sort of site for them. They treat it with great reverence. So just being respectful of that is as important as anything else.
Yes, absolutely. I'm making inroads into the language. I have to say um, it's harder than I thought. But then there we go, talking to someone who speaks fluently. But
Well, no, I used to, and not anymore. I'm pretty rusty, but yeah, I do. It was fun to learn. It's an interesting language, and like any, particularly if you're under stress, and obviously in the military, in some scenarios, in combat situations, it can be stressful if you're being shot at, or somebody's been blown up, or people are wounded. And even though the working language for us in the Gurkhas was English, clearly people are going to revert to their native tongue under pressure. And if you're just chatting, if you are a bunch of Brits or Americans or whatever in another country, you're not going to deliberately just try and speak the local language if you're chatting with people from your own culture. So I took it upon myself to treat the learning of a language really, really seriously, because I wanted to be as competent as I could be, so I could engage and understand them as best I can. I'm just a little bit rusty now, because it's been quite a few years since I've had to speak.
yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? When you can put an awful lot of time into learning other languages. I've done it in numerous countries and regions now, and come back come back home for a few months, and then you just start to lose it again. It's quite frustrating.
Yeah, yeah.
So Ash, what was the idea behind the book then? I'm just going to show it on the screen again. What uh, what
Well,
state?
it was.
Sorry,
Yeah, go
go
on.
on.
I was going to say I didn't mean to write a book. It was completely really by accident. I had no plan to write a book. So I would class myself as either a reluctant or an accidental author, really. But because I have happened to have had a number of experiences over my lifetime, some of which have been fairly extreme in a number of different ways, personally, professionally, etc. Been very lucky to be a part of some very high performing teams, both internationally, as you mentioned, in sports, but also in other walks of life. And various friends and colleagues sort of bullied me over a number of years and ground me down and said, look, some of these things, if you could find a way to capture them, might help other people. Would you be interested in doing that? And I wrestled with whether that was sort of self-indulgent to write stories that were my stories. But I came to a kind of reconciliation with myself that if I could write in a way thematically with different types of trauma, resilience, and experiences of challenge and adversity and overcoming adversity and succeeding and thriving and all that kind of stuff, growth and recovery, if I could find a way to write it that would be helpful to others, and even though they are my sort of stories, they're not about me or for me, then I might consider it. So that's what we ended up doing. There are 12 chapters that cover everything from self-doubt, fear of failure, imposter syndrome. There are some military vignettes in there because some people want to hear all that. Relationship breakdowns, loss, the power of community, and sort of the peer support that you can get from that, and kindness and respect, etc. So we tackle a bunch of different themes in the book, with my ramblings first, and then very good friend of mine now, who's a international neuropsychologist with a lot of experience in complex PTSD and neuropsychology generally, but particularly in relation to emergency services and policing. So I partnered with Dr. Jess Miller, and Jess takes my ramblings and then, in layman's speak, turns them into kind of clever explanation of what's actually going on in the brain. So when I talk about an incident or an experience that was traumatic or challenging, then she'll sort of explain why that is the case. Because the brain doesn't cope with these things in the moment. It takes time, and this is what the chemicals are doing, and this bit's different. The bits of the brain have different roles, and she kind of breaks it down in a really easy to understand way to explain why these things are hard and why building resilience is often a painful process, but it's a necessary process to become stronger and come through the other side and be more resilient as a result. And then we offer a number of tips and techniques and practical exercises to help people if they are struggling with those kind of things. So it's not a memoir, it's not a military book. Any military references really are just a vehicle to explain a different type of experience or trauma or challenge. So it's going to live hopefully in a sort of section of the bookshop that is more the smart thinking, emotional psychology kind of vibe than a memoir or a biography or that kind of stuff. So it should hopefully endure for a long time in WH Smith at the airport and all those other stores, where there's always that section that sort of sits there at the front of the shop that people can pick up. And because it's coming out in January, we're hoping it'll be a kind of new year, new you kind of vibe where people are looking for a different path or a change of approach for them in the new year. And we hope we can help with that.
Brilliant. I walked through Heathrow once, and my book was above James Corden's on the bestseller list. That was a.
And you didn't put it there. You didn't move it.
Yes, no.
I might be guilty of doing that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you've got to turn your book face out when you go in the bookshops. But no, it made me chuckle because, as you well know, you probably mix in different circles to me, Ash. But when you write a book, you're going to have no end of people telling you not to, and why are you doing that, and it's the ones that say, well, look, I'll read it for you, and I'll let you know if it's. So when I walked through Heathrow Airport and it was, I don't know, number 12 on the bestseller list or something, I was a bit, yeah.
I've got a friend he's written a couple of books now, but his first book he now doesn't mention because he's not very proud of it anymore. And he said he was on a plane once and saw the person in the seat a couple of seats away from him reading his book, and there was no photo of him on the book or anything, so the guy would not have known that he was the author. He goes, "Oh, see, you got that book? I was about to get that one. What do you think?" He goes, "Oh, it's absolute crap. Don't buy it." waste of money. And he's like, oh, shit. So his next book did really well. It's won a bunch of awards, but he said, this is a necessary journey. You've got to be able to take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole kind of psychological mechanism for dealing with that negativity, and it's a funny world. I'm just a great believer. If you haven't got anything nice to say, just don't say it. Ash doesn't want me saying rubbish stuff about. Well, that's mental. It's crazy, but. In the world of social media and everything, everyone thinks they've got a voice and that they've got to exercise it at every opportunity. And as a content provider, you got to, you got to have ways to distance yourself from that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we're tracking its sort of progress. It sits in the hot new releases section and it goes up. It's been up to number 2 in Amazon. Although we did chuckle yesterday, we saw that it was number 3 in a section that I've not seen before of death and grief. Like, that wasn't a section I was planning on being in. But if it's helping people who are, worried about that kind of stuff, then I'll take any bestseller placements that I can.
Yeah, you've got to work with Amazon there a bit to get them to put it in the right categories because
Yeah.
they kind of sort of guess. Bear Grylls, is he a mate of yours?
Yeah, we've known each other a long time. Yeah, yeah. He's been very supportive. He was one of the biggest bullies actually for making me write the book in the first place. So I blame him partly for this.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff.
No, he's
Good
been very
stuff.
supportive.
So, Ash, let's go back to the beginning then. So, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the south of England, in a fairly small village, and went to school locally in near Winchester or in Winchester. And because I could sing, it turned out I managed to get a place in a choir called Winchester Cathedral Choir and sang for 5 years really in the choir in my early years, which was a really interesting experience. We did lots of TV and radio and made a bunch of records, and we were selected for a thing that Andrew Lloyd Webber did back in the day called Requiem, which ended up having a single that was taken out of that particular album called Pie Jesu, which we ended up getting to number 2 or number 3 on Top of the Pops back in the late 80s, which was fun.
I remember all
Um,
this.
yeah, so incredible experience. We traveled the world singing, Vienna Boys Choir in the Musikverein in Vienna and in all the big concert halls in New York and LA and stuff. Pretty fascinating experience really for a young kid. And when I was writing, I was reflecting on I don't remember ever being nervous. Nerves is a thing that you kind of learn as you get older, right? We had very little self-consciousness in terms of how big a deal some of the things were that we were doing. And when we did the world premiere of the Requiem live in New York, been to 60 countries or something, and we were just like, yeah, let's just sing, it'd be fine. Now, if somebody told me I was being beamed live to 60 countries, on the stage, I might be thinking, oh my God, that's horrendous. I'd be far more nervous now as an adult than I was as a 12-year-old or 11-year-old or whatever I was at the time.
Yeah, I think it's changing for young people now. Would you agree with all the insecurity that comes with social media and all the oversharing and all this kind of stuff? I'd imagine you probably got a lot of kids with
Well,
anxiety now.
yeah, I mean, I worry that the chasing of likes and that kind of stuff, and I'm sure it affects adults almost equally as children, to be honest, but adults in theory have more coping mechanisms to understand that, you're not going to get thousands of likes on a thing that you might post or not. I do worry that this need for external validation to make people feel whole is quite a negative thing, or it's a thing that could become very negative for many people. I mean, I'm so grateful now looking back that obviously there were no phones, there were no cameras really. If you had a camera, it was a big deal that you took a camera somewhere on holiday and you maybe took your 12 pictures, and then you had to go down to Boots and get them processed. And you thought about everything. You weren't taking shots every 30 seconds of your food or your this or your that. So I do wish that for a lot of kids for whom this is quite anxiety inducing, having this needs to be constantly creating something or being present online for people, most of whom you may not even know, but from whom you are relying on validation to feel like, you're popular or whatever. I do worry about that a lot.
Yes, I my dream come true is the day when I ditch all social media, and if people are asking, well, why have you got it? Well, I made I made a promise to myself. I made a certain goal with respect to my career to get to a certain place, which I still haven't got to after about 20 years of trying. But it's just for my business, it's just I produce content, and you've got to let people know what books you're writing, what videos you're making, what mountain you're climbing next, what charity work you're doing, and it's handy. But if I was an individual and I wasn't doing any, I would love not to have it in my life. I'd love to go for a run and not think, oh, should have put my Strava on, and it's. I want to come on to that. I want to come on because you mentioned something very special there, and this is the problem why I think we lose a lot of veterans is the externalizing our sense of self-worth. And that becomes problematic when we're indoctrinated into a troop mentality. You had to look after the troop. I had to be a troop member, and there's always that imposter syndrome, fear of the other. Am I letting everyone down? This kind of stuff. So we'll come on to that. But so that was a fascinating part of your childhood, Ash. What you mentioned some. What were the more challenging parts?
The challenging thing really was that my father was a manic depressive alcoholic, and so family life or home life was pretty unstable. If I probably just the summary word would be unstable. Quite a lot of emotional and verbal abuse. Obviously, lots of drinking, screaming and shouting and smashing things up. So it got to the point that I just stopped going home really as a kid, and I luckily was at various boarding schools which you had to be at to be in the choir because it was such a full-time job really. But I worked out that many of the incidents that took place were triggered by me coming home. And so I just thought, if I can not go home, then maybe that'll protect my mum and my sisters from, being also co-recipients of the abuse that we would receive as a result of my arrival back. So that was challenging for everybody, really. But again, it taught me a lot of lessons, as unpleasant as it was at the time. And I do write about this, that it showed me firstly that some of the families with whom I stayed when I wasn't going home, and I had some incredibly amazing friends who had lovely families, and just realizing and learning that there was another way, that screaming and shouting wasn't necessarily normal, and the abuse that we just got used to was not normal. And when I used to stay with some of these families, it was always slightly disconcerting when, like one incident, one of my best friends, his dad worked for the United Nations, and they lived in Rome in a small apartment. And I used to draw because I was a sort of artist as a kid, would do paintings or drawings to sell enough to buy a plane ticket to go and be able to stay with them. So I would often be in Rome with them, and they were always trying to play tricks on their dad, my friend and his younger brother. And I used to get so nervous because the stuff they were doing to their dad, which was pretty mean. If it had been my case, I'd have been beaten to every which way till Sunday. And the dad just went, just would laugh like a sort of Father Christmas kind of haughty laugh and just go, "Oh, you boys," and it was just like, oh my God. So I sort of lived on tenterhooks for a while when I was with normal families, because I just was expecting whatever they did or things that were said would suddenly escalate to an incident, which is all I knew. So there was lots of learning and healing by being part of normal families, and it taught me as well that, particularly I was in a lot of sports teams, that those friends, with whom I was doing sport day in day out on the rugby pitch or on the river or judo dojo or whatever it might be, were absolutely critical. So that friend network, I've always been somebody who tries to stay in touch with as many people as I can and be there for them if anyone ever needs it. Because without that friendship group, I don't know quite where I'd be, honestly.
Yes. The sins of the father, it's a massive, a huge effect on, well, can speak personally on young men. I'd imagine probably quite a few of us joined the military had similar experience. Alcohol is really, we don't really address the elephant in the room in this country, do we? You made me chuckle there talking about your friend's dad. I was trying to order something for my brother on Amazon Prime the other day, and I put my Amazon Prime on, and it said, this is Amazon talking to me. It said, "Hello, piss." So,
Okay.
so I was like, so I clicked on my profile. It said, "Piss off, daddy." My son's 10 years old.
Nice touch.
I'll tell you, all of us in the room, we just cracked up. And I remember thinking, my God, that would not have been the response when I was that literally would have been a trip to the headmaster's office,
Yeah.
like you say, a lot of violence back then. And I think it's great that we can stop that. So Sandhurst, what I take it you train in. Does all the army officers train in Sandhurst?
Yeah, everyone goes through there. So it's a year course. And then halfway through that is when you get to select the regiment that you'd like to join. And then you go through an interview process. And if you're lucky to get your first choice, great. If you're not, then you have a second choice and hope that they'll take you. And if you don't get either of those, then you kind of go into a pool. And then there are much larger regiments that take sort of everyone that's left, I suppose. So again, very lucky that the Gurkhas accepted me. And that's where I went.
Yes. Sorry, Ash, I just want to track back a bit because I meant to say, I just want to ask, boarding schools, can you tell us, did you experience abuse going on? I don't mean like personally. Is it like a thing? I'm guessing.
I was beaten a lot, but it was the 70s and 80s, and I was labeled as a naughty child, which I was. The idea now that I talk about it in the book with hopefully a little bit of humour about the kind of implements that I was beaten with, everything up to and including a floor tile, because that's all the teacher had to hand in the classroom that he'd taken me down to teach me a lesson. But in terms of I guess what you're getting at, sort of more sexual abuse, I certainly was never exposed to any of that, and don't know anybody in my friend group who was, but there were certainly teachers that many years after the fact, one would look back now with the benefit of hindsight and go, yeah, there was absolutely no way they should have been teaching. But we as kids at the time knew the teachers that you should never be alone with, but nothing was ever, we didn't report them anyway. It's just, we just knew as a sort of unwritten rule as kids, like, don't ever find yourself in a room with Mr. Whoever or whatever. And we just knew there were strange teachers that were not to be trusted. And there was a sort of just an innate code or knowledge that this was not a safe place to be. But, it was the 70s and early 80s. So nothing really was ever done then.
Ash, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I'm 52.
Yeah, okay. I think you're fair in the years a bit better than me. I'm 56.
I don't know about
that. Yes.
I don't know about
that. Your paper round was obviously easier than mine. So yes, Sandhurst. Does everybody go through the identical training there, despite you might be going to different regiments?
Yeah, so it's basically management and leadership training, generic, within which you learn a bunch of different things, many of which may not be directly relevant to the place you end up, but they're all useful skills in terms of learning, leadership, and management. And I think now you actually get some kind of civilian qualification that the course equates to an NVQ or something or other that is a recognized, certified level of management and leadership. We certainly didn't have that at the time, but it's a year of sort of foundational learning. But really, the main learning happens once you actually go into the wild and get your first platoon or troop, and then really learn what soldiering and leadership is all about.
What was your nemesis in training, Ash? Mine was always the speed marcher. It was short legs, lots of equipment. I never failed one, but I used to just go at the back so I didn't mess anyone else up.
I didn't really have a nemesis per se. I quite enjoyed the whole process. That as long as I was lucky that I was quite a fit person and always been very sporty. So as long as you could do well in all the fitness tests and you could iron your clothes and turn up on time, it seemed like it was fairly basic admin, honestly. And a lot of the early course is very similar to soldier training. It's just, how do you march, how do you clean your shoes, how do you iron your clothes. It was, a lot of that was just do as you were told. So I didn't find it hugely challenging. There were exercises where you were tired and wet and pissed off and cold and everything else, which is just part of learning, right? Digging a trench or in one case, going on an exercise where I was on sentry duty and a an overseas cadet was tasked. I was paired with him, and he was tasked to dig the trench or the shell scrape that we were going to lie in overnight. And I came off my 2 hours or 3 hours of sentry duty, whatever. It's pissing with rain in the middle of a Welsh forest, and I got there, and he was fast asleep, snoring with a shell scrape that was about 3 feet long because he was really, really small. And it's like, dude, I mean, I couldn't fit in it, but he was good enough for him. So he just like, oh, I'm good. And he went to bed. So I was like, thanks very much. So then having to dig again. But no, I mean, I'm still really close to a lot of the platoon that we had. And I was actually out last night with a couple of platoon colleagues from way back when, and we're still very, very close. We have a WhatsApp group where the banter is still fierce. It's like we've never left in terms of the way we interact and, are very, very tight as a team.
Yeah, it's good. I think you appreciate your buddies more, don't you, as you get older?
Yeah, we were even chatting last night. I was asking if anybody, because they had a reunion recently that unfortunately I wasn't able to go to, and asking if everyone was healthy, because of get to your 40s and 50s and cancer and some unpleasant things like that tend to creep up, and there's generally always somebody in a friend group or a team that has suffered. But touch wood, so far we all seem to be faring pretty well. So long may that last.
Yes, good, good. What do you think of the notion? Like in the Marines, there's a big kind of like Facebook community or groups and this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of these guys. They really still just absolutely love it. You'd think that they was all still serving. I'm a little bit more like, to be honest, I think if Facebook hadn't come around, I wouldn't have like thought about the Marines at all. I left in 1995. All good stuff, it's good career for a young man, but I've gone on and done an awful lot of other stuff since. But you get this kind of notion that the military makes you. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. I'd say more the military presents you a platform where if you've got the qualities in you that they sort of come out, if that makes sense.
I think probably a mixture. I think it's hard to put a one size fits all on everybody, but I think for some, they absolutely, the military, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines or whatever, do make them. If they've come particularly from a background where they've not had the stability or structure or certainty about what's coming next, then actually having that opportunity will, whether it makes them or just helps them become the people that they are destined to be, then I think it's an incredibly powerful community and structure within which people can thrive, particularly if they've come from deprived backgrounds or places where opportunities are fleeting or few and far between. So I think for some, they've known all along they always wanted to serve and they might have innate leadership skills or what have you. But for many, that's not the case. And leadership can be learned and can be taught and is taught. And people, some are late bloomers and some, arrive on day one. And I remember feeling very out of my depth at Sandhurst because I never joined the cadets other than at school, which was more just a fun club, I suppose. There were people who turned up in our platoon and company at Sandhurst, some of whom were former soldiers, so they just knew how to do everything. And we all felt incredibly out of our depth that there were people who seemed to know everything that was going on, and some of us just didn't have a clue. So I think everyone turns up with different levels of preparation, understanding, experience, etc. And I think what Sandhurst and Lympstone and other places do very well is take that raw material and then identify the skills that are needed to augment the core product, let's say, to turn it into something that's going to be really valuable, where every individual can feel like they've got purpose and teamwork and all the skills they might need to thrive and be successful in their careers.
You saw some action, Ash, by reading your biography there. You've also got wounded. What's people always sort of skirt this when I'm chatting on podcasts, and I'm like, hang on, the audience, this is the stuff I think we all try to be a bit humble because we're coming from a military perspective, but the audience obviously haven't been, for example, in Afghanistan on the front line with or in my case, the Northern Ireland conflict, with literally with bullets whizzing past their ears. Could you give us an example of a hairy moment?
I've had a few. Maybe I'm just careless, but I've in my 7 years of deployments, I've been shot a couple of times. I've been blown up a couple of times. I've been in a couple of helicopter crashes, incidents, and a suicide bomber's tried to kill me once on my birthday, which was kind, and a bunch of other, more hairy moments. But um, obviously, getting shot was the hairiest, I guess, because I was very lucky. I'm very lucky to still be here. I was shot in both legs, also hit with a couple of grenades that exploded. Rocket propelled grenades exploded behind me, so I got peppered with shrapnel from them as well. A couple more bullets went through my backpack, which I only realized the next day that just went behind my head. So that was quite lucky. And the bullet in my left leg was less than a centimeter above my knee joint. So I'd always wanted to be taller, but actually, if I'd been a little bit taller, that might have meant that I'd lost my leg. So, I'm very lucky to have come through those sorts of things. Sadly, I've lost many colleagues along the way, not just Brits, but other coalition colleagues and partners and friends, probably to the tune of 70 plus killed and many more with life-changing injuries. I know far too many widows and orphans. So, because I do feel pretty lucky and fortunate to still be here and able to be high functioning and able to support the community, that's why I've thrown myself into doing as much as I can to support various charities. I'm an ambassador for Royal British Veterans Enterprise, also supported Combat Stress, and Gurkha Welfare Trust, and a bunch of other charities along the way as well. And I've committed to give 100% of all profits from my book to veterans charities because, as I said earlier, it's not about me. If there's anything that I can do to help those who are less fortunate than me, then that's kind of what drives me. So, yeah, lots of hairy incidents, but I'm still here to tell the tale. So that's always good from my perspective, at least.
I've always wanted to ask someone how how painful is it when you get shot?
I mean, it's not, it doesn't tickle. It's a weird feeling of if you blunt trauma. I mean, you might it may sound trite to say it, but have you ever stepped on a drawing pin or
Yes.
punctured something where there's this sort of a dull ache that's a sort of really weird, sort of nauseating feeling of something that's just shouldn't be there. That's penetrated. It's a little bit like that, but obviously there's also sort of the velocity and I mean, it's quite shocking. I mean, for me, it all happened very, very rapidly, as you'd expect. Um, I was actually hit by two bullets. Thank God they were both ricochets, so I didn't get the full force of the bullets. I mean, we were ambushed probably within. Well, these guys were on a roof, and we were just down below in the courtyard, and 10 or 15 of them were firing on automatic. Luckily, they weren't really aiming. So sadly, one of my colleagues was killed, but the rest of us kind of staggered away. Um, One more, and those two bullets obviously hit me and knocked me backwards. Actually, the force of that was kind of like just not literally knocked me off my feet. Um, the bullet that hurt the most actually was the third bullet, which just grazed me as it went past on my butt, on my buttock. And because that was phosphorus, it was a trace around. The burning from that was the most painful thing. The actual holes that I was leaking from were obviously tedious and needed patching up and stuff and tourniquets and what have you. But actually, the thing that hurt the most was the bullet that had just grazed me like a few layers of skin and was burning because phosphorus is a pretty unpleasant thing when it's burning. That was the thing that hurt the most, and so friends still take the mickey out of me when I was at the time was saying, "Please check my ass," because I was like, I couldn't see why something was hurting quite as much as it was. So yeah.
Did you get? Did you have to return to the UK for surgery and this sort of thing, or?
Yeah, so they flew me to hospital, Aeromed, in the middle of that firefight still, actually, much to my chagrin. I was trying to not leave because there was a lot still going on. But I was eventually medevaced out and they removed one of the bullets in that local hospital, forward deployed. And then one of my left knee that was right next to my knee was much more complicated. So I had to get flown back to the UK and went to Selly Oak, which many will know well, up in Birmingham, amazing hospital where they treated so many of the wounded vets that came back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They did an operation over the weekend. One of the best surgeons in the UK kindly did the operation for me, and I run more slowly than I used to, and I've got some nerve damage and can't feel my leg above the knee for that and another incident. But it still kind of works. I mean, I'm technically disabled, but when I compare myself to others, I'm not really. I wouldn't call myself disabled, given that there are plenty of people who struggle far more than I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where I'd rather be, Afghanistan or Birmingham.
You decide.
Um, so yes, fascinating. And your chopper, are you allowed to refer to it as a chopper, or is that Americanism?
Call it what you like.
Okay, your bird. Uh, did you fly that in combat?
I flew at Northern Ireland, yeah, so it was operational deployment. Was where I did most of my flying down in South Armagh quite a lot, but
Wow.
across the Northern Ireland supporting the police. So it's pretty interesting flying. A lot of it was at night, as you'd expect. With the weather being as it is in UK and Ireland, a lot of the weather required us to fly extremely low level, which is always good fun. Quite dangerous if you're flying very low level with power lines and birds and the like. And obviously you're close to the ground if anyone wanted to shoot at you. But really, really fun flying and a great team, and again, an amazing experience. So I feel very fortunate that I was given that opportunity.
Yes. What year was this, Ash?
This was late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay. I'm just trying to think. We were there in 89 in Belfast. Um, what what role is the Lynx then? I mean, it's not a troop carrier, is it?
No, it is. Well, it was. We would always fly in pairs, and we could take between 6 and 9 troops per helicopter. So you'd pick up multiples, basically, so half-size platoons, and you'd drop them, pick them up, and drop them off. And generally, everything we did was primarily to escort police who weren't allowed to go anywhere without military escort. So, if they had to deliver a summons to a known terrorist who needed to go to court, they wouldn't be driving down the road to go and deliver the summons and post it through the door. So those sort of things would require quite big operations where we would fly and drop the military patrol off, and then the police person would be escorted safely or securely to the address, and then we'd have to extract them afterwards. So a lot of stuff like that happened. Things that would be completely abnormal in any normal domestic situation. The police wouldn't have to be flown by military helicopters protected by 20 or whatever blokes, but that's kind of how it was.
Yes. I want to come on and chat about the book but before I do so, I'm also fascinated to ask about your music and your sport. But before I ask that, can you just give us a rundown? What was it? OBE and
I've got a few things. I mean, just if you spend enough time away and you're part of some brilliant teams, then if you're the commander, then sometimes you'll get honoured for that work. So I don't
yeah.
really,
So sorry,
it's
sorry,
they're
you're being
collectively for a lot of.
you're being very humble. It's MBE OBE. Sorry, and I mean the Bronze Star. How does one end up receiving that?
That was for work in Afghanistan with some Americans
Yeah.
over time. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Tell us about the award-winning musician.
Well, that goes back to my choir days. So not only did we do all these things with Lloyd Webber and sing around the world, but we that album that we made in the Beatles studio in Abbey Road, the EMI studios in Abbey Road, which was pretty cool in itself. That record ended up going triple platinum.
Hmm.
So that was pretty cool. So that was we have silver, gold, and platinum discs for those things. So that sort of technically makes it award winning, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Well, you're a
we
triple platinum artist.
well, yeah, I mean, I didn't write it. I just was one of the singers, but it was pretty. It's quite a cool thing to have been part of. Which I said as a kid, you just kind of go, yeah, well, we're off to New York to sing, and we'll do a thing, and then we'll come back, and quite special things, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also it's those kind of things in life I love. You recorded a record in the Beatles studio. I mean, that's just
Who was a band that I loved. I grew up with the Beatles because my mum loved the Beatles. So your early music tends to be your parents' music, and so to be in the studio where they recorded, the one that just springs to mind was Twist and Shout, where it's quite an echoey recording if you know it. It's because the studio is so big, and obviously back then the microphones weren't able to completely sort of lock down the fact that this studio that they were in was so large. But yeah, incredible experience to be recording where one of my most favorite bands at the time were, and I still have a brick from the Cavern Club where they used to play in Liverpool before they knocked that down. I've got, a brick with all its provenance of this was where the Beatles first played, but it's kind of fun.
What? Yeah, we were in. Is it Southport? There's ranges in Southport, aren't there?
Oh, I don't know. I've not been.
Yeah, we. I think we ended up on the ranges in Southport one time. So me and my oppo decided to we were going to go into Liverpool and find the cavern,
Oh yeah.
and
Did you find it?
someone said it's now a car park. It's there.
Right.
So, okay, they did have a a replica available that we went and had a drink in.
Right.
So what's from your military career? What are the biggest takes or the biggest take towards where you are now, kind of leadership wise or lessons wise?
Well, I think because of the experiences I had in uniform in some pretty interesting and unconventional or sort of complex situations or environments where you could not predict from one moment to the next what was going to happen. We always, as you'll know well, would plan meticulously for any mission or operation, but that adage of no plan survives contact with the enemy, I think that's as applicable in life as it is for those in the military. And the advice I would give to people who are thinking about how they can be more resilient or cope with the vagaries of life, which are moving faster and faster and faster. The world is not slowing down around us, and many things that we might have used to control or been able to control, we can't. I think the best bit of advice I would have for people is embrace the complexity, accept that in complex situations it's inherently unpredictable, and you will never know all the answers in advance. And so think of those situations where the answers are not necessarily clear as opportunities rather than risks. But we as humans default to see risk and threat when we don't know the answers. That's just how we're wired. And what my experiences taught me in some combat and other situations was where the answers are not yet written, that is freedom. Obviously, you're going to have boundaries that you can't do stuff illegal, and there's certain guardrails within which you have to operate. But if you can mentally accept that it's going to be messy and untidy and unpredictable, and think about how you as an individual or a company or your organization or your team can be the people or person to take advantage of that opportunity, where you know that most of the other people also facing the same thing will not act or will not take advantage because they'll go, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And then they'll just do nothing. Or they'll be so, paralyzed by not having the answers. That's a massive opportunity in all walks of life. And so for me, when I think about resilience, it's if I had to sum it up as a way to explain it, resilience is the ability to adapt and learn in the face of adversity. The key bit is that last word, really, adversity. It's very hard to build resilience or become resilient if you've never struggled. And as unpleasant as struggle is, and as you and many listeners, I'm sure, just in life have gone through many struggles, it's those struggles after the fact, if you come through them in one piece or battered and bruised, but you come through them, that is how you build your resilience, not least because you'll be able to better appreciate the times when things do go well. And if you've never failed, it's much harder in life to be resilient, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a sort of paradox, that, isn't it? That we're kind of taught to shun adversity and hard times. And I say it about addiction. I say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the divine putting a challenge in my way because I was going the wrong way in life. And the byproduct of coming through that challenge is you've got to reorder a few things and not least of which you come out of it grateful for this existence, not seeing it as as a sort of burden or a struggle.
Yeah. And I think we all, as much as we, when we go through something hard or we appreciate something more, somebody's act of kindness, I must do more of that, I must be kinder, I must do these things. We are inherently quite lazy as humans, I think, and you do often default to just doing what you know. So I try and consciously remind myself to either do the things that I know made a difference to me in life when people gave me an opportunity, or they trusted me to do something where they didn't really have any right to, but they took a punt and they gave me the chance. And the feeling that I still remember viscerally of being trusted to do something in a place that might have been beyond my rank, really. But my boss said, look, I believe you can do this. As long as you don't invade another country or create an international incident, I trust your judgment to go and do the right thing. Those kind of lessons or experiences, I do try and take into my professional life now, bringing on junior colleagues and giving them the opportunity to make mistakes and learn, but with the support and mentoring and guidance that you can bring, because they'll remember that feeling of how they were trusted and given the opportunity, and then they'll do the same to people below them when it's their time.
And we were going to talk about the sports. Sorry, we'll stay in this area. But what were the three sports you've played at World Championship level?
I did England rugby as a schoolboy, although I stupidly turned down my final trial because I was doing rowing as well, trying to juggle both things, but represented England as a schoolboy at divisional and south level. Played at Harlequins in my year between school and going to university. Also rowed for Great Britain and then represented Great Britain also in duathlon. But I did a bit of triathlon as well. But my swimming wasn't good enough, so if I wanted to get in the World Championship team, I had to drop the swim and then do duathlon, which is basically replacing that first long swim with a longer run. So it was run, bike, run. And I was never brilliant at any of it. I mean, I fully admit that, my best placing was ever that I had was 20th in the world, but that I was pretty happy with that because I'm not a natural runner, I'm not a natural cyclist. But I just wanted to try and see what I could do, and it's quite intoxicating if you do manage to represent your country, either in uniform in the military, you're representing your country, right? But in sport, it was a really nice community, and the sports that I was in, it was all about the team, and that was quite, as I said, intoxicating and addictive to try and be part of. So was lucky enough to dabble in a few different things. Never went to the Olympics or anything like that, but to have gone to European and World Championships a few times was it was pretty fun.
Yeah, the old swimming. If your body is not designed, if your body's not naturally leaning towards it, you can try as hard as you like, but
Yeah.
you can only get so far. That's where I do triathlon. My 10-year-old does triathlon as well, and I made he's smacking out front crawl now. I'm so proud of him because it took me. I taught myself from YouTube when I was about 48. It was finally one of those things. All my life I just wanted to swim front crawl, and I never really made an effort to do it. And then finally, I thought, right, I am going to do an Ironman, or I ended up. I ended up within 2 years of going to the swimming pool to teach myself to swim, I ended up doing a quadruple Ironman. So there's a lesson for your friends. It's never too late, and it's
No,
actually,
no.
and none of it was hard, if I was completely honest. But my body, Ash, I'm quite broad-shouldered, so I think that's a bit of resistance. My head is probably larger than normal, so it's always trying to sort of push my feet down. I've got small hands and feet and short arms, so I'm not pushing a lot of water behind me, and my body fat is sort of almost non-existent. So yes, however, if you hit the pool twice a week, you just even within these constraints that I've got, you do get better, don't you?
Yeah, I've not swum for a while. I mean, I'm now working on increasing my body fat, so I'm more like a walrus now. So I'm hoping that if I can get a bit more float, then it might improve things. I do remember a race once. It was a national selection race for the Great Britain team, and it was a sea swim. You had to run down the beach in Bournemouth and then go out to a buoy, swim along the beach for 750, back again and in. And I remember getting to nearly the turnaround point, and I was feeling all right. And then I just looked across and saw my colleague from also the army team. and she was having a shocker. I mean, I didn't know this until we discussed it, but I saw her, and she's normally miles ahead of me. And when I saw her, it was like, oh my God, I'm keeping up with her. This is amazing. So the second half of my swim was one of the best swims I'd had because I suddenly had this confidence that actually I could do it. Unbeknownst to me, she was having an absolute shocker and she'd been hit by waves, and that's why she was being slow. But she said when she saw me, it just killed her. She was like, "Oh my God, am I that bad that today Ash has caught up with me?" So it's funny how mentally these things can make a big difference. I had one of the best races and she had one of her worst, all for the same interaction.
What do you take away from sport, Ash? What thing do you get from it that you take forward in your life or you've incorporated into the
Teamwork,
book?
teamwork and trust. I mean, I particularly some of the sports like rowing, your body is absolutely dying when if you put everything into it. And as part of a team, whether it's a pair or a four or an eight that you might be in, you know that every other person is putting their bodies on the line as well for the collective good. And that was again from a very early age, being part of those teams and sports where it wasn't about you as an individual. You had to be part of something bigger. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've carried on in life, that it doesn't matter how well you do or it shouldn't. If you're part of a team, you've got to be doing stuff for the collective good in business and in sport and other things. So um, yeah, that teamwork, trust, and the friendship that comes from doing hard things with other people and succeeding or failing or both, because it is always a journey.
Have you thought about rowing the Atlantic or anything along those lines?
I've thought about it, and I mean, yeah, I quite like the idea of it, but it's been done so many times. I'm not sure whether it's. I mean, if I could raise a bunch of money for charity, then it would be worth doing. But I wouldn't do it just to say that I'd done it. For anything I do now that's extreme, it's got to be for some much bigger purpose. If I can raise a ton more money or raise awareness about a topic or a thing, but I'm definitely itching to find something to do in the next year or two that is extreme enough that generates interest that will make it worth doing. But I'm not ever going to do something just to say I climbed this or I rode that. That's not really kind of how I'm wired.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I rode the Atlantic simply because I've read books about ocean going adventures all my life, and I just wanted to experience. I just wanted to experience that kind of unique ocean um, passage.
Yeah.
So, um, who is your book? I know you said it's eclectic. I know I would imagine probably most people could pick it off the shelf and get quite a lot from it. Is it
Yeah.
specifically aimed at, say, for example, depressed people or underachievers or overstressed?
No, not really. I mean, it's designed to be accessible to anybody and everybody. I mean, one of the early working titles I had was actually Walking Wounded, which I thought was quite a clever play on words because I was technically walking wounded when I was shot. But actually, what I was trying to get at was that all of us in life, regardless of what we do in life, are all technically, I think, walking wounded in some way or another. We're all picking up niggles and injuries, mental or physical, along the way. We're getting stronger as a result of it. We're hopefully learning, and we just keep going. But it ended up being called Mindful Soldier. That's fine. But the people that have read it so far are all very, very different. I've got single mums with disabled children who are struggling to just cope with the pressures of that. People who've got chronic depression who've read it, soldiers, veterans who've read it, disabled sports people have read it, um, business leaders, authors. I mean, everybody who's read it has been extremely kind, actually, so far. But they've all connected with it but in a slightly different way. Different people are pulling different things from it that relate to them. So unless you're I wouldn't say narcissistic, but unless you're the most confident person in the world, I think most of us will have had some form of imposter syndrome at some point. So there's a chapter that talks about that. The fear of failure or perception of failure and self-doubt. There's a chapter on that. If you haven't wondered if the thing you're doing is the right thing or if you should do something because your brain is trying to convince you that maybe it's easier just not to do it. We've all been there, I think. We've all had relationship breakdowns, I'm sure, unless you happen to have married your childhood sweetheart and it's been sunshine and roses ever since. It's just real life happens. And so we want this book to be a real life guide, or not a Bible, but some sort of guide that you can take on the journey with you. And then depending, you may only have one thing right now that's relevant. But if that can give you some sort of solace or inspiration or motivation or tips and techniques to help you get through the thing that is the most acute right now that you're struggling with, and as a result of getting through that, you'll be more resilient, then that's what we want to achieve. Clearly want to raise as much money as we can for charity, and that's really what's driving me. So, I'm happy to promote it everywhere I can because it's not for or about me. But I'm very lucky that my original publisher went bust, not once but twice, which is pretty special. But my new publisher is far more professional and absolutely brilliant, and they not only agreed to honour all of the pre-orders, of which there were tens of thousands of pounds worth of orders. The original orders of the original publisher, they're going to honour all of those, which is amazing. But they also gave me an advance I didn't ask for. So on day one, I can give checks to the charities without having sold another copy and say, right, this is my intent, is that every single penny that I make from this, I will be donating directly to you. So that feels good. And hopefully that in itself is a story or a differentiator that will make the book of some interest to people that might want to understand why we've even done it.
So mindful soldier, what does being mindful mean to you, Ash?
I'm sure there's lots of dictionary definitions about what mindfulness is and being mindful. For me, this is about just giving ourselves the opportunity to take time. What's the right word? Not indulging, but giving ourselves permission to just think about the things that impact us. And for me, I became much more mindful, I think, of my body and those around me during COVID, where I don't sit still normally. I've traveled more than 6 months this year in all over the place. So I'm never kind of in one place for more than a few minutes. So COVID was actually really good for me, and I was very lucky not to get sick, seriously sick. I had to do a bunch of time locked in hotel rooms to try and go and see my daughter in Australia, which was challenging, but it was fine. Um, but being forced to actually be stable and settled for in one place for more than 10 minutes was probably the best thing that could have happened to me at that time in my life. It just reminded me of how much impact there is when you add external stressors and stress inducers, whether it's traveling or even drinking. I can see now that I'm an avid Garmin watch user that it only takes a couple of drinks and I can see my heart rate change or my sleep patterns get worse. Or, there's things that are now much more obvious to me about how I should be taking care of myself. And then it's obviously by dint of that, I can be better able to help people think about how they might take care of themselves if they haven't really got to that point where they are making time or feel like they have time to be mindful about themselves and the things that happen around them.
Absolutely. You kind of covered what I was going to ask you. In fact, I will ask anyway. So for people listening, it's a funny thing, Ash. I was in the sauna the other day at the gym and the lad, I was chatting with the lad next to me and he was saying, oh, it's hot in here sort of thing. And I got talking about marathon disablers. And I told him, I said, it's 52 degrees. It was 52 degrees when I ran in the Sahara, and he was like, he was sort of super impressed with that, to the point where, and he said something like, I would never do anything like that. And I'm not saying that everyone's got to go out and go running or climb mountains. Of course not everyone's got, but I was just thinking, I wonder how much that limits your outlook on life, and then your subsequent, let's call them achievement or experiences is a better word. So what would you say, Ash, to people out there that are kind of hesitant to get out there and live their dream and do? I mean, sorry, I'll just say one thing more. I've lived a life of adventure for one reason. It's the easiest way for me. It's I ran the length for the United Kingdom, an ultra marathon every day, carrying my Bergen full of camping gear. That was like 36 days. I didn't have to be sat here doing this. It was brilliant. Yeah, I was fortunate that I had some money in the bank to sort of do it. I've travelled extensively because it's just way more fun than sort of being stuck here. And I guess it's hard to sort of get across to people that are maybe, living with a bit of fear and that, or li,
Well, it may
li,
not even be fear. It may just be that life, there's a lot of stuff that causes you to be fixed, whether it's kids and commitments that mean that you can't just take time off to go and do fun stuff. So I would never criticize people for not being adventurous. But if there's ways that we can help people think that it doesn't have to be a massive expedition to be adventurous, there's lots of things you can do locally every day that one could constitute or describe as being adventurous. And I've got a friend who does a great podcast called the Everyday Adventure podcast called Nikki Bass. And she's a veteran and she's a mad surfer, keen surfer, and she's all about the outdoors stuff. So every day she tries to do something that is adventurous, either for herself or for the people that pay to be coached and mentored by her. And I love that idea that every day can be an adventure of sorts. It doesn't have to be navigating the Nile or running across America or whatever it may be. There's everything that we can do. We just have to make time. But again, life is can very easily overtake us or overwhelm us, and we just get stuck in the, well, I'm going to get online. I'm up early, so I'm going to get online. I'll start doing my emails, and you realize that you didn't go for a walk. Like we lost our dog earlier in the year, um, after 17 and a bit years, which is amazing. Never had a dog live that long, and she was the thing that you looked at every first thing in the morning, and you go for a walk, and then in the afternoon you go for a longer walk, and then she'd obviously forget that she'd had any walks at all, and then demand another one in the evening. But you just got outside because you couldn't not. I mean, if the dog would look at you like, but I want to go out. Come on, let's go and do something. And I use that as an example that I always felt better, regardless of what was happening in life, from having just gone outside and seen how excited and happy she was to be sniffing around and seeing rabbits and squirrels and stuff. So, for her, that was her adventure. And for me, I wouldn't necessarily say it was an adventure, but just doing something that took me away from the computer was all it took on a daily basis, a few times a day, to just recalibrate and not be overwhelmed by an inbox that never ends, or the pressures that we very easily sort of succumb to or find are overwhelming day to day.
Absolutely. Ash, final question. I'm asking this on behalf of my audience that will say, Chris, why didn't you ask him that? Palantir, do you still have a role with them, or was that a...
No, no, I worked with them for a number of years. I left there in actually 2021. I now work, I lead the international business for a company called Drone by Axon. And it's basically airspace security, but think all things counter drone. So we protect stadiums, hostile borders, airports, nuclear sites, presidents, prime ministers, sporting events. It's really, really varied. Super yachts. So we are the company globally that is not just stopping the bad drones flying, or identifying and then hopefully stopping the bad drones, but also enabling the good drones to fly. So if you are a medical company that is using drones to deliver medicines, or you're an Amazon delivery company, then we help people protect that lower airspace, to make sure that the things that should be flying can fly safely, and the things that shouldn't be flying don't interrupt those other things. Like if you're in prison, you would be very nervous about drugs or weapons or that kind of thing being flown in, and we can help all of those different types of organizations understand the nature of the threat. And as you'll have seen from the media, even in the last few weeks, there's a lot of illegal activity happening that is closing airports and disrupting day-to-day life. So we're kind of front and center of that. So it's pretty busy, which is why, as you can probably hear, I've got a cold and I'm, a bit run down from having done so much travel around the world this year, because it's just growing. It's doubling, if not tripling every year at the moment.
Do you have any celebrities in employer services?
Plenty. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on Palantir's kind of ever increasing presence, for example, within our military, and what your thoughts are on having essentially if I just say for our friends at home, the running of our military, the day-to-day running of our military, kind of contracted out to a private company of, what do we call them, Silicon Valley billionaires.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's strictly correct to say that they are running the day-to-day of the military. Palantir, like many other companies that are contracted to defence, provide capabilities that are designed to help streamline your ability to understand availability of spare parts, for example. I mean, some of the things that they do in the US, and I think now in the UK a little bit, having an inventory that understands that for every vehicle or aircraft or thing that is flying or driving, it is made up of thousands, if not millions of parts. Cataloging every single one of those parts to identify that if you want to try and make sure that you have more planes or more tanks or more things available more of the time, then that sort of inventory management stuff actually can be very, very helpful. Because we are always struggling, certainly my years in defense anyway, of having availability of the things that you need when you need them, where you need them. So capabilities that can help improve the outcomes for soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and then ultimately enable them to do their missions, I would certainly not say is a bad thing. I know what you're getting at in terms of the fear that there are large companies with outsized influence politically, potentially, who people are worried about privacy and just monopolizing different parts of the market. But for all the headlines that Palantir and others get, I mean, there are plenty of other technologies that are also equally relied on that are all trying to do similar things in terms of make our soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines safer and more effective.
Okay. Ash, yes, brilliant. Well, I wish you all the best with Mindful Soldier. Friends, I'm just getting it on the screen again. There you go, ready for pre-order.
Available in all good bookshops today. Go and
Yes.
get yourself a copy, and you're helping veterans with every purchase. So that'd be great if you want to join.
Absolutely. Ash, just stay on the line so I can thank you properly. But for the purposes of the recording, massive thank you. Congratulations on all your achievements and what you're doing now for the veterans community. Friends at home, hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. If you could like and subscribe, that would be absolutely amazing. And just to say, we've got 2 places left on our Arctic Legends trip. So if you fancy coming up to the Arctic with me and my team of former Royal Marines Commandos, the first week of March, we'll be teaching you how to ski and survive up there. And then we'll be trekking or skiing from cabin to cabin. Send me an email if that interests you. And take care. Much love.